So just to begin, I'm just going to kind of introduce myself and what I do. And so my name is Tamara. Oh, I know, wait. Hello, my name is Tamara, and my last name is Chayo. I know a little sign language. But I'm very excited to be here because actually I did learn, I had taken a number of classes in college and undergrad college of sign language, ASL, and I actually had a deaf friend when I was younger, but my sign language is pretty rusty. So a little bit about myself. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've been in the field for about 12, 13 years, and I've been working with all ages. So I started from really early childhood to adolescence. I've worked in crisis, I've worked in the home, I've worked in the school, I've worked in the office, I've done a number of therapy, and I've done a lot with working with families, working with teachers, and working with the child. I have, over the years, and so you might see a little bit throughout this training of getting a little bit more into early childhood. Because over the past 5 years, I've been really focusing a lot more on early childhood. And why I want to bring that up is not because you're like, oh, I'm not working with young children, this doesn't apply to me, but it's the greatest assessment to figure out kind of where children are at when they're heading into school age, when they're heading into the school. So I've been working for a number of years in Chicago. I was working in a Head Start program. I was working a lot with teachers, a lot with parents, and a lot with the children. And now I actually just moved to Florida, and I'm now right into the school system. And the jump from Head Start to the school system is a big jump for you teachers. So I have now the experience of also working with teachers in that environment. I'm trained in a lot of evidence-based practices. I'm trained in dealing with helping the non-compliant child. So really some strategies, and some of the strategies we're going to be working with today are some strategies of helping with the non-compliant child. I am certified in yoga, in Kundalini yoga, and I've done a lot of family yoga classes, really working with actually more younger children, but I do a lot of yoga and meditation with children in the school all the time. I've been trained in, it's a program called Act Raising Safe Kids and talking about violence prevention. And I just got trained, which I will be talking a little bit about today, Circle of Security, which is a wonderful training as well. And so I will need from you guys, so I have had a lot of experience with really kind of looking at resiliency and building social emotional development with children. What I will need from you as a team is how do we adapt it in terms of working with the deaf, hard of hearing, and blind students. So that's where I will definitely need needing you guys. So that is me. So before we start, maybe I can get to know you guys. And I'd like to know how many of you are teachers? Okay. All right. Social workers? Psychologists? Anyone else I'm missing? Administration, perfect. So this is wonderful because the reality is, especially being a teacher, you don't want to be it is one of the most stressful jobs I've seen and observed because in the fact that we've got a whole team here, you need the administrators, you need the social workers, you need the psychologists, and you need the teachers, and the more that we're working together, talking about resiliency, that's the way it works. So to begin, what are we going to be talking about today? We're first going to learn about the protective factors children need to learn in early childhood to prepare children to enter into the school system. So once again, I'm going to be talking about early childhood, those key protective factors that children are needing to learn from 0 to 5. And then getting into where are they when they're starting to enter into the school system and looking at what have they learned, where are their deficits, and how do we help them. And then really getting into learning some concrete strategies that can be used to develop social emotional skills by age. So one thing I will say, this training will be fun. There's a lot of small group activities, there's a lot of movement. I hope you'll have fun. I'm not going to be talking the whole time. And I'm hoping you guys will be talking as well, okay? So some of the resources that I'll be using in the training today are, I think you guys are using some of the Devereaux Early Childhood Assessment. Well, that's DECA is for the early childhood for 0 to 5, but then I had also printed out there's another one for it's DESA, which is going into school-age children. So I'll be working, it's the framework of the early childhood DECA that's the protective factors. ACT Raising Safe Kids is this violence prevention curriculum. SPARKS, which is a structured psychotherapy for adolescents responding to chronic stress, and helping the non-compliant child. Those will be the kind of the key ones that I'm kind of bringing them all together. So before we begin, this is something that's from SPARKS, and it's an activity that so SPARKS is like it's a group for adolescents helping in terms of dealing with children who have had to deal with chronic stress. So it's focusing on a lot on mindfulness, paying attention to your body, and so usually in the group, they will be starting the group this way. So what I want for all of us is to actually do this together. And it may seem always like in these trainings when everyone's like, oh yeah, the deep breathing, all that stuff, it's like, it sounds good, but really does it work? But really about this, it's about the practice. And so that's where we're getting this into the routine. We're gonna start the training with this, and we're gonna end with this. So if we can, we're gonna sit down. And if you can, have your legs just on have your feet on the ground. If you feel comfortable shutting your eyes, if you don't, and especially because I know you're going to be needing the interpreter, keep your eyes open. And what I want you to do is, having your hands on your lap, just take a deep breath in, counting to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And just keep on taking your breaths. And I want you to notice how it's feeling with your air going in and your air going out. Listen to your heart. Is your heart going fast or is it going slow? What's the speed? How high is your chest going? Is it going up or down? Is this feeling uncomfortable? What are your thoughts that are going on? And so just take a couple breaths of inhaling and exhaling. Now I want you to open your eyes and pay attention now to the world around you. Like who's sitting next to you? Where's your hands? Where's your feet? Look at the room. Just stopping and noticing everything that's around here, noticing the environment that you're in. And then if you can, just pick a partner who's next to you, or if there's 3, I want you to just check in and just tell them on a scale of 1 to 10 where your distress level is. So on a scale of 1 to 10, like how stressed out you are, and how in control you are on a scale of 1 to 10. And that's all. If you want to share why, that's fine. If you don't have to. Okay, so just go in either groups of 2 or 3, whatever is easiest, and just give your numbers. Would anyone like to share their numbers? You don't have to exchange why. Yes?
8 and
8 and 8. This is a perfect example. Look at, I mean, I would never guess that. You're looking as smiley, happy as can be, but you're totally stressed out and out of control at this present moment. And that's so important to know, because someone can come into this room all smiley and happy, and we have no idea that you're an 8-8. So hopefully by the end, you're going to be a 1-1. We don't know. It's okay. Anyone else?
like a 1-2-1-2.
1-2, 1-2. And so it's important also to look at, so that's important. So going back to the kids in your classroom, they're coming in, and if we don't check in where they are when they're coming in, we don't know if they're an 8-8. And then all of a sudden there's behavior problems. They're like, what? But they're coming in with an 8-8. So I don't know how you felt sharing your 8-8, if that made it feel a little bit better that you're not alone with your 8-8. You got a team here. And also just noticing what's important with this is looking at also the distress, like how stressed out I am, and how in control I am. Because there's definitely I mean, I'll be honest, I came in with now putting all the microphones on, videoing. I'm like, okay, I'm a 7, but I felt like, okay, in control, I'm about a 3. So that's okay. So it's like you want to look at both, and those both are important questions to ask, because stress is always going to be a part of life. The goal is never to be 1-1 for a life, because I'm sure there's a reason you're an 8 and it makes sense and we want you to be an 8. So just looking at that, and also so you could be checking in with the youth when you're coming in, okay, where are you at? And you can use these things. Just another pretty picture looking a little different. Same concept. So the rules of this training, I'm all about rules. Clear rules are huge. There's clear rules working with kids, clear rules with working with youth, clear rules working with adults, very important. And oftentimes we don't do clear rules. We're very good at telling people what we shouldn't do versus what we should be doing. And so this is something that I feel like the most effective strategy working with parents and working with kids, instead of being like, don't do this. Okay, let's think of what you can do. And we'll be doing that throughout the whole entire training. What can they do versus what they cannot do? So my rules are be reflective. This is a very hard thing to do. It's like, I just feel like, so I started working in this elementary school. There's 700 children in the school. And so now I've been there about like 6 weeks, no, almost 2 months. And it has been crazy. Like all of a sudden I'm like, it is the most reactive environment ever. And I'm like, I can't even see straight. There's kids having problems all the time. What is going on? I'm feeling like I'm a bad worker. I mean, there was so many feelings going on. Luckily, I have somebody who I can like go talk to. I have a supervisor who I can reflect with going, okay, what is going on? And so I had all this time to be able to process it, to be able to kind of come back in and go, okay, what is going on? And then I think of the poor teachers who, I mean, you are jam-packed every second of the day, and at 3:30 or whatever, you want to be on your way out. And so it's like there's that little time to be able to reflect. Reflection is such a huge thing. And to make matters worse, not only are you dealing with all these children all the time, everyone's like, fix this child. Why are you doing this? Do this, do this. Everyone's analyzing you. It's a really stressful job. And so I want you to just use this space to be, first of all, a good enough teacher, a good enough therapist, a social worker, good enough psychologist, a good enough administrator, because oftentimes we'll either be like, oh gosh, I'm the worst teacher, and then the process stops, or I'm hopeless, the process stops. So first of all, just thinking that you're good enough, you're trying your best you can, giving a space to not criticize yourself for being an imperfect human being, because we all are. Being able, and really the whole idea of reflection is being able to kind of, when I'm with a child, I'm able to reflect on me and what's causing me to stir, and also look at this child at the same time. It's really hard to do. And so I really want you to be using this space to be able to reflect on yourself in a non-judgmental way, and reflect on your classroom in a non-judgmental way, and then looking at how do you help your students, because it is a tough job. And I just have to share this amazing, so I just went to this training last week, and I don't have the statistics, so I don't have the study exactly there, but I'm going to tell you in general of this. So I went to this training called Circle of Security, and it talked about attachment and healthy attachments. And so it was really looking at parent attachment with their child. And they talked about the whole concept of being reflective. So they looked at, okay, a healthy functioning childhood and then a parent who was reflective, the probability that the child will have a healthy attachment, likely, very likely. Then they looked at a healthy childhood, but the parent was not reflective. It was less likely to have a healthy attachment. Of course, the worst case scenario was an unhealthy childhood and the parent not reflective. not likely to have a healthy attachment. However, this was what's amazing. You can have an unhealthy childhood, a dysfunctional child, but a reflective parent, and they are more likely to be having a healthy attachment than the healthy relationship. Does that make sense? Because they have to work harder at it to really become reflective. And so it made me think of teachers, and I'm thinking of you guys, I was just thinking, I was eavesdropping of this conversation over here before I got there. And I mean, I'm working with difficult children with lots of trauma, but just the added layer of, you know, being deaf, hard of hearing, blind, whatever it is, just a whole other level. And so I think about just the different kinds of behaviors that are coming in. So the whole idea that being in a classroom, if the more reflective you are, actually the more connected you're going to even be feeling with your students and with yourself in this classroom. So that's really amazing of this whole importance of really just looking at ourselves in this in a non-judgmental way, okay? Be open-minded. What that means is, no, that's not gonna work. No, that's not gonna work. No, that's not gonna work. We don't know it's gonna work until you play around with it and you figure out who you are with this, then you may know it may work or it may not work. So I'm gonna be giving lots and lots of different ways of different activities. And some you may like, some you may not. And so just you're gonna look at, okay, yeah, maybe I'll do this. And being adaptable. So I'm going to be giving lots of activities. And so how are you going to, and lots of concepts, how do I adapt it to a kindergarten, a middle school, a high schooler? How am I going to adapt that versus, no, that's not gonna work. And that's where we have this team of people here. We have a lot of people here. I want us to use our creativity because creativity, critical thinking is our friend because there are so many fun things we can do with this, of really building this resiliency. Any questions? So what are some examples of stressful experiences that children can be exposed to? So from the children that you're working with and the youth you're working with, what are some stressful things that you know have come across with them? The election, very good one. Yes, that's a huge one.
Language deficits.
Language deficits, a huge one.
Unexpected changes to the schedule.
Unexpected changes to the schedule. A low-income family, and how would that apply?
Sorry.
Why, if a low-income family, what would?
They don't have food, they're dirty, they don't have clothes.
They don't have food, they're dirty, no clean clothes. Homelessness.
Situations where they can't communicate.
Situations where they cannot communicate.
I should say divorce.
Divorce. I mean, there's tons and tons of stuff. There's abuse that's going on. There's just, the levels are, and I feel like it's getting more stressful and more stressful. So children are under a lot of stress, and I think of even the youth that you're working with. I mean, there was just a number of people of like this not being able to communicate. I mean, how much more difficult it is dealing with stress. And so, and the thing is, just in society in general, we're in a more stressful time. Parents are more stressed, whereas maybe back in the day, you could have, you know, one parent working and the other parent staying at home. That's no longer the case in order to survive. So parents are coming in, maybe working 2 jobs, 3 jobs, and they're stressed. They may not be speaking, they may not speak English, they may not be, there's so many different things that are going on where it's just a much more difficult time. We can, like I just think of the electronic media and the election, what we just talked about. We won't get into too much political stuff right now, but still, like, how much we are seeing this all the time. We're hearing every racist, sexist, we're seeing everything, and just the amount of stress that's going on because electronic media lets us hear it over and over and over again. And that's just us. I mean, that's where the parents are experiencing, but what about just the amount of time that youth are now spending on electronic media it's stressful. Like I mean, a lot of those games are really stressful. So it's just creating a lot more stress in the environment, whether we like it or not. Unhealthy living, and like, so food and exercise, they're not doing that as well. I think about and just even going, so I was talking to this woman on the airplane when I was coming here, and I was telling her about this training, and she was telling me that her grandson is blind, and she was saying, make sure you tell the school, tell everybody, tell them, just say that anyone can do anything. But how much more complicated it is, because she was like really passionate, and she was talking about like him riding a bike, and I was trying to ask like, well, how does he do that? And so just even wondering just the additional challenge of just in general, they're not living healthy food, like they're not having a healthy living. But let's just say the challenge of how do you do exercise when the parent's not letting you ride a bike, and how much more difficult that is in terms of taking care of stress and dealing with stress. There's little, and this is a key thing, there's little time to teach children to deal with stress because everyone's stressed out. You're not really intentionally helping them deal with the stress. And so they're left kind of fending for themselves, or they're left coming to you guys and going, okay, I don't know what to do. And just all the additional stresses we've been talking about of having special needs. What would you, so outside of language, just so I can hear from you guys, what would you say is some of the specific challenges of dealing with the population you're serving? Like in dealing with the stress of, we talked about language. Has there been do you feel like additional stresses that make it more challenging?
For our students with visual impairments, they do not get their materials sometimes at the same time as their sighted peers because the gen ed teachers aren't getting the stuff that my teachers be brailled, so there's not that equality that way.
They're not this equality, and they're not getting the materials right away, so they might be hearing it, but they're not able to do the materials right away. That's interesting.
Our students are seeing and experiencing a lot of things, but they're not getting a lot of explanation as to helping them to process through what they're seeing or what they're experiencing in order to make it understandable, tolerable really for them.
So they're not, no one's really explaining everything, like they're being able to observe everything, and also like that the visual part is much more heightened. They're noticing everything, but no one's explaining why, and then it's left being like, okay, what do I do with this?
Just to piggyback off of that, a lot of the families don't sign, and so there's limited or no communication at home. They can't interact with their siblings very well or their parents.
So the family doesn't know sign language, so they're not able to communicate with their parents and with their siblings. Like, really huge one.
Well, and then to go off something that Kelly said about the kids, like nobody's explaining things to them. So they kind of attach their own meaning, which might or might not be accurate. They think they know, and then sometimes stubbornly hold on to that belief despite your attempting to explain otherwise.
So they start what they're observing things, they make their own explanation. This is my explanation, and then they're sticking with it because this feels safe and this is what it's going to be. And no one's told them otherwise. And then they'll have years of this explanation of what's going on. Any others? And we'll be continuing to talk about that. 8-8. Now you're like 9-9.
And on top of everything else, they're also just trying to figure out who they are and have their own identity, and just figuring that out on top of not being able to communicate, not always getting the information, things like that.
So on top of all of this, they have to now figure out all of this. And it sounds like oftentimes by themselves or this team right here.
I'm thinking less like what happens in the school when I think of stress with the kids, and more like what happens outside of our control, because we have to deal with that when they come into school. They're not thinking about, do I have a language deficit? They don't care. They're thinking about, I just saw someone get shot last night. My mom left again, and now I have to take care of all my little siblings, but I don't want to let the police know because then they'll come and take them. Who's in that situation right now, and it just makes me great. That makes me a 10. Because I'm like, how can I help her? Because I understand what she's saying. She doesn't want to be separated from her siblings. It's not her fault that the adults in her life who are supposed to be taking care of her leave. I mean, to me, I'm like, I can understand why you're not thinking about school. I understand why when you come to
Right.
school, you're exploding in the classroom.
Right.
I don't know. I think when you go to like the basic, if their basic needs aren't met, they don't have food, they don't have shelter, and just someone, not necessarily, I mean, obviously you want them to have somebody who loves them, but that is there for them. I mean, I see that a lot of my kids over the years, they just become more and more desensitized. Like before it was horrific if, oh, you know, this happened, this kid got beat up at school, like, hey, did you hear about this fight? I got it on, I videoed it. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, I just, you know, like the stresses of that too, like pressure from their friends, or pressure from society that it's normal. And a lot of my kids are like, this is like, why? And they're asking me why. And how do you explain that when, well, I don't know if I have those answers.
Right. So you are, I mean, there's a lot going on. So like just talking about the student that she has worked with, I mean, there's a lot of trauma. Is the parent going to be there? Is the parent not going to be there? They're seeing violence going on in the community. It's never ending. And yeah, it's hard for them to focus because they're scared. I'm not going to tell anyone because DCFS may get involved. It's a scary, scary world. Did you have one? No? Sure? Okay. So obviously, they're going to be having stresses and they're going to be having behaviors that are going on. It makes sense. And that's why it's so important you guys are here and what do we do? Because they are coming in and they're coming in where they're not maybe talking to their families and all this stuff is going on. And so what is the effects of stress? Especially when they're not able to talk about it with anyone, especially those 0 to 5 years, 0 to 5. So their body is not functioning to the full capacity. So like, you know, typically there's healthy stress. So what can happen is, okay, I'm going to school and this is where like I might be, you know, my heart rate's going a little bit up and I'm, you know, maybe I'm a little sweaty, but then I'm able to kind of go back down. What happens though when you're in constant stress, you kind of stay up here. And you think about it, how often are a lot of these youth, like and children, like especially when they're not talking to anybody, are they able to go back down? And maybe school is the first place where they're able to start connecting and sort of start going down, but they're coming in where they're like already in hyper alert, like, okay, I'm already feeling stressed. So if I stressed out 8-8, what's your name? Yeah, keep on doing it. What is it? Chloe. If I stressed out Chloe, I mean, what if I got mad at you? You might get quick to, if I started saying something obnoxious to you, you might be quick to act because you're already at an 8. So, which I'm not going to do, and I'll stop talking to you. But it's like, but going back to Chloe's, like so many of our children that are coming to school and they're at an 8. And so what happens is oftentimes their muscles are constantly tightened, their bodies are constantly stressed, so they might well be having more physical problems, their posture's off. So even going back to that whole breathing thing, that sometimes it doesn't work, because a lot of people are like, yeah, it doesn't work. Well, a lot of times, if you're like this the whole time, breathing's not going to be effective. If you're breathing wrong, it's not going to be effective. And so how do we kind of retrain our body and retrain our minds to be like, how do I go forward? Because the results ends up being, I'm sure a lot of these behaviors you see, impulsivity, they're hyper alert and they become oppositional. They're not able to control their emotions. I mean, have you guys seen this? Yeah. They have difficulty focusing, concentrating, learning. They have trouble going to sleep or staying asleep. And they have difficulty getting along with peers. This is, I mean, I'm sure you guys know this. This is not like rocket science of seeing all this stress that can happen. And I like to look at, you know, there's a lot of risk factors that we talked about here of making children more prone to violence. So we talked about the individual. So it can be like I think of a lot of like the medical or physical problems that happen. So going back to the trauma of maybe how you lose your hearing or how you lose your sight, that can be really dysregulating. And I just think of, there was one child, it was last year, at the Head Start program, where all of a sudden he stopped he stopped talking, and we weren't sure if he was even able to hear anymore. He ended up having a stroke, but it looked like he was not able to hear or to communicate. So this was at age 4. And what happened in this poor child's age 4 was, first of all, he started becoming aggressive with others because he couldn't communicate with other people. Other peers started to like make fun of him because they knew he wouldn't, so they would do things because they knew that he wouldn't speak back. So his relationships with others was awful. He'd be just crying by himself because he couldn't communicate. He's like, what is wrong with me? No one knew what was going on. And on top of it, mom just lost a baby, and she was so worried about her child becoming deaf because her parents were, and so she was totally not there for this child. And so why, going back to this individual, like, and that's not everyone, but that can be some cases, that child for a year kind of lost out on these protective factors of learning to build relationships. He didn't have someone coaching him. He was really left alone, and how do you start talking to him? And so it was a really traumatizing thing. And it could be totally different in another situation, but that's definitely an additional trauma that can happen going back to an individual. And so going back to even now the relationship and trust me, this is not going to be like a buzz, like you're going to leave this training being like, oh, this is so depressing. But I'm going to eventually get to more things of how we help. But this is the reality. This is the reality, and this, I have a feeling, can be a lot of the youth that we're working with. And so then we look at so that's the individual. That's the things that were happening with this individual. Even worse, what if they have a learning disability? Or even worse, they have a temperament that doesn't match with their parent. There could be a lot of things that can make it really difficult. Then going into relationships. What community are we living in? We had talked about living in a violent community, how that can contribute to it. Or there's family violence, or there's harsh discipline. All of this can contribute to going, oh. Then we get into the community. Are they connected to anything in the community, or are they not? You know, and then getting into society, we talked about the election. I mean, we could talk about that, but even I think of our society. So I had lived for a number of years in Chile, and this was amazing to me. They had celebrated a war that they lost. Like that was a holiday. And I was like, wow, that's so interesting. The United States would never do that. They would never have a holiday of a war we lost. And why? Because we're living in a culture that you need to be strong, you need to be independent, you need to do things on your own, you're weak if you need people. So like, we have no matter what as part of our society, we even have that. So I always look at like, where are these different factors and where are we at a deficit? And then we'll get into where we are in a positive. So just looking at that. So what can we do? It's hard to stay in that because it's like, the reality is even with this training, we can't take any of that away. We can't take away, you know, the difficulties of, you know, now not being able to hear or not being able to see, or domestic violence. Sometimes you just can't, it is what it is. We have no control over that. We have no control over the community they're living in. It's a really big thing, and if we take on all of it, we're going to be really feeling hard about that. So we really need to look at what can we do in resiliency. And so that's where looking at what we can do. So resiliency means, first of all, not taking away the bad stuff because it is what it is, but learning to be able to bounce back, to be able to become strong and healthy or successful again after something bad happens. So kind of going back to, here's the stress. We know the stress is here. I might not go back all the way down with my heart rate where I'm feeling like at a 1, but if I'm at an 8, maybe I can go down to a 5 based on building these protective factors. And so really that's ultimately the goal. We can't make everybody happy because it's just not realistic. But we want people, we want our youth, we want us. And that's including us, because going back to this job is really difficult. We need to also learn how do we cope with this so that we can really help. Any questions yet? So how do we do it? By building or creating protective factors. So these are skills that children need to learn and that learn to help to deal and cope with life in a healthier way. Because oftentimes, what are they doing to cope with their problems at home? What are the behaviors they're doing at home, at school, to cope with all these problems? What? They're aggressive. Anything else? Isolation. And is it working? It's creating even more problems. And then they're left alone. And I'm always like, I tell teachers, I tell parents, I tell children, I say this all the time in therapy and when I'm working in groups, I don't want you guys suffering by yourself. We're in this together. And so that's on every level. We don't want teachers to be suffering by themselves. We don't want social workers suffering by themselves. We don't want the parents suffering by themselves. And we don't want children suffering by themselves. And that's the message we can show them. So then we look at protective factors. So, and this is where, going back to how do we, I always think about, like, so I work a lot more with children just living in downright trauma, low-income communities. And I'm always asking the question, so why is it that one child is surviving and doing this and one child is not? Like, why is it? And it's always looking at, well, what are their protective factors? What was it that got them there? And as you start asking questions, you'll find that out. So even in the midst of all the craziness, there might be some kind of protective factor. So you look at, like, the individual. Like, what are the things that maybe can get them to do that? Like, one thing I could say of, like, a protective factor of me is, because has anyone here lived in a perfect childhood? Do we know anyone? Okay, so we're all in agreement, no one had a perfect childhood. So in my childhood, you know, I had, like, I would say I'm like a people pleaser, outgoing person, kind of person. So that matches really great with my mom. She likes that I was, like, wanting to please her. She loved it. She was great. So she was connected to me. My sister was much more of an introvert. And my mom really struggled. She had other protective factors, but she really struggled to connect with her. And so what happened but me, not only did my mom was able to connect with me, I had, like, my friends' parents, I had the whole community, everyone was looking, so that was the other thing, not only a protective factor of me being, like, outgoing and people pleaser, I'm short. I mean, that's a big thing. Everyone's like, oh, let me take care of her. So I got my needs met by so many different people just by that. So it's amazing when you think about it. I'm like, you know, for years, I'm like, oh, I hate being short. I hate it. No one takes me seriously. But it really saved me, and I never realized it. So I want you, as I'm talking about this, think about your own protective factors. Is the person likable? Like, so I always worry about those children that are coming to school and the teacher doesn't like them. And I'm like, oh, because the ones that are easy to connect, everyone's all over them. Or if the child's, like, attractive versus unattractive, sometimes that plays a role. Like, there's all these things. If they have a natural talent, like, that can be. So going back to the woman I was talking to on the airplane, her grandson, who's now in high school, got really into music. And he's really into bagpipes. So now he's, like, got connected to other, like, bands of bagpipes, and he's now going all throughout Sarasota, Florida with the bagpipes. So, like, he just happened to find a talent, and now he got connected to a community of people who play the bagpipe. So it's amazing. But there could be other things as well of looking at why this child could have that could be a protective factor. This is a key one, particularly, and so why is that also important for you in school of how are we exposing them to all these different things that they can be involved with? Because clearly there's not going to be a bagpipe class in school. I mean, it would be great if it was. But so he never would have known about that talent. But maybe there's something else in school that we can get them exposed to that they don't realize that they had this talent. And then they can really kind of explore it. And that could be a protective factor. Relationships. So I think about, this is key, like so in order to have and develop, like, healthy relationship skills, they need just one positive relationship. It doesn't have to be the parent. It can be you. It could be it could be any one of you guys. And so that's really huge. So it could be like you're living in all this chaos, but you have a grandmother, or you're involved in the church and you're really connected to the pastor, or you've got a neighbor that's really connected, totally can change everything. And so even when you're talking with families, finding out, because sometimes children don't realize who their support system is, and we have to help them with that. The community, and this I think is a little bit more of a struggle for you getting connected to the community, because a lot of the youth that are coming to your school are not part of the community. So how do we get back connected to the community? But maybe the more that you can find out about the community, that's another one. So going back to, you know, I have a lot of families I've worked with, like south side of Chicago, but they were really connected to church. And that had been a safe haven for them in the midst of all this craziness that's going on. And then looking at society. So there's like good and bad, like going back to the internet, that can be really overstimulating. But how do we teach like about now getting information and getting connected? Like I think of now, like going back to talking to this woman on the airplane, of like, how do you start creating that community? Because you have the community in the school, but they go home and they're not connected to the community of that they're with. So how do we get connected? And so the internet can be a really wonderful way to get connected and to gathering information of like, wow, if a child's not able to see, how am I supposed to be teaching them how to ride a bike? Let me look it up. So there's a lot of cool things you could do with that if you use it as a protective factor. So really looking at the goal of working with these children are, how do I start building protective factors? How do I start doing this? Where do I go? Okay, any questions?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm curious about the issue of children who are likable
Mm-hmm.
and cute. Because what can we do with children who are not so likable and not so cute?
Well, very good question. And the thing is, I go back to protective factors because that's just human nature. People just go to them and they may get their needs met a lot easier. So as us, as teachers, professionals, those children, we just need to work a little harder. Because I guarantee I've worked with unlikable children, and then you get to know them and you're like, oh, wait a second, they're really cool. But on the surface, they're not. And so that's where we think of those oppositional children that we deal with that oftentimes are not likable and are really annoying. And you're like, come on, just listen. That's where we have to be working more, because ultimately that's what they're needing and we're pushing them away. So that's where, going back to that reflection, so like I had worked with, I was observing a classroom last year with a teacher, no, it was 2 years ago, and I observed it and I was like, you know, Sandy, do you like this kid? And she's like, no, I don't like this kid. She felt so bad, she did not like this kid. So we had to talk a lot more about this, because, so in therapy terms, we talk about like countertransference issues. So that means like our stuff. And so how do we separate our stuff to go back to be working with this? So those are the children that are really more difficult. Yeah.
I really try. I have a lot of, I would say that happens more than it doesn't happen with my students as a social worker, and I really try to have conversations with the teachers when I see that they don't like him, and I know the kid isn't likable, but I try to find things about the kid that can be likable, or explain what makes them not likable, where it's coming from, and I have those conversations with the teachers, and it doesn't always work, but sometimes they start thinking from a different, and I call them out on it. You're the professional, you're the, and I say, I know that he's annoying, I know that he's, or she's whatever, and I said, but you have to understand this is where they're coming from, this is what they come in every day with, this is, and sometimes there's things that, try to keep confidentiality, but I think there are times when it's important to share things about the kid or the family, or things that are gonna make the teacher more understanding, and so I do that as well, and I say, hey, he comes in this way, or this is happening because this is what's going on. And then that sometimes works. I can't say it always works, but I definitely find that once teachers know, even if they don't love the kid, they're going to have that little bit more patience to try to maybe be more patient when they understand where the kid's coming from.
So just to repeat that, as a social worker, we're trying to talk to them, and so you had talked with teachers and being like, okay, so look what's going on. This is why they're acting this way. You're really trying to explain it. And I think what you were saying also of sometimes sharing what's going on with the family, and that's why this child is acting this way, and really talking about actually it's a difference of being a social worker and being a teacher, because oftentimes all the teachers are getting are the behaviors, and we might have the background, which is easier to give the empathy, but then all the teachers are dealing with is this child is not listening, and I have like all these other kids that I'm needing to deal with. And so so that's where going back to giving teachers the space to be like, I don't like this child, it's okay, like you're good enough, you're a human, and let's think about this child in another way, and giving that space, because it's really difficult.
So one of the things I've been going back to recently is, you may not like this child, but this is somebody's child.
Yes.
Somebody loves this child. And how would you want your child treated if they were in school? Or if this was your brother, or if this was your sister? This is somebody's child. And whether you like them or not, you have to teach them, and you are responsible for them just like you are every other kid in the class that you may love, because I don't know, it's someone's kid, and if I'm sending my kid to school, I expect that they are in a safe, healthy, happy environment. And if they are not, then there is something wrong, and I am 100% putting that on the team that works with that child.
So really looking at like, this is the child it's somebody's child. But I still need to make sure to go with, this is the additional pressure of a teacher, I feel like, where we're constantly like, you need to do this. And then I still go back to reflection. How do teachers get this space to go, okay, what is going on with me? What is this triggering in me? Why? Because I could tell you the certain kind of child that really is like nails on a chalkboard for me. And I can deal with some other oppositional children and it doesn't trigger something in me, where others are, I'm like, are you kidding me? You are so annoying. And so that's where also giving everybody an opportunity in a non-judgmental way to be like, what is going on? Like, how are you feeling? Because it's also really easy to go, you need to do this, because every child deserves to have this. But then the teachers are left being like, but I can't stand them and I have no time to deal with how much. And so hopefully with this, the training is giving a step back to go, what's going on?
Yeah, so the other thing,
Okay.
I was going to say, the other thing is that if you can see that they don't like the student, so first.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's, for me, I mean, the adult is the one, you have to be the professional, you have to be the adult, and it's a perfect opportunity to kind of show kids that you don't have to like everybody, you do have to respect them, and you have to treat them, the same way you would treat any other person. And as the adult, I mean, I know that everybody's under pressure. If the teacher isn't doing that, then there is, a big problem.
Right. So you're saying also, like, I mean, once again, this is a learning opportunity. So it's really going back to being reflective of ourselves and then the classroom. So what are the values we want to have in the classroom? The classroom is, okay, we need to learn to respect others in the classroom. So even if I'm not liking somebody, how do I show respect? How do I check in how do I express my frustration in a healthy way with a child? Like, all of this is modeling.
And I think too, it's okay to have those conversations with kids and say, when you are doing this causes me to feel frustrated because I cannot attend to this student, because I cannot continue with my lesson, because I cannot, I think it's okay to teach kids that your behavior not only affects you, but it affects me, it affects all of the other students in the class, and allow that conversation to happen so that they understand what they're doing is actually causing some of these reactions.
And a key thing, so you're saying it's okay for the teacher to be able to express their feelings to the child, but key point, where you're still going back to stress and in control, you could be showing emotions, but you need to be in control, because and if you're not in control, that's maybe not the right moment to do it, which is fine. So I still go back to teachers, you need to be good enough, and then how do you go back to it? Any other, one more?
Well, I just, piggybacking off of that, having that conversation as a teacher with the kids, saying, this is, when you do that, this is how I feel, this is how it makes me feel. How do you think the kids around you feel? Putting it in perspective, but also then saying, what are some other options? that you could do to still get that need met or to express that. And even if, I believe that if they hear those other options enough times, even if the next time they go back and do that behavior again, you have that same conversation about other options of expressing that need or more appropriate behavior in that situation.
Most kids want to.
Most kids want to eventually, yeah.
Oh, you're a step ahead. So she's saying, so a step ahead of the training. That also just, so giving a space to talk about it, how everyone's feeling, and then what are the alternatives? And if it's 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, it's okay. This is tough stuff.
And I think opening yourself up to the, is there something that I'm doing that's causing you to react this way? So opening up to allow the child to say, well, you keep doing this, which is what's making me aggravated. There is that open conversation between my behaviors maybe affecting how they're reacting.
So, and what you're saying is also giving that child the words to be able to express what they're feeling with this teacher, which is also really amazing. But that also is important going back to reflection, because I could say, so a student can go to me and go, I didn't like when you did this, and I'd be like, well, you know, you shouldn't say that because blah, 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 blah. Well, that just cut that all off and now it's over. Versus, you know what? I realized that I should have done it a little bit differently. You're right. Now that's a whole other different thing. But I can't do that repair with that student if I don't have the reflection. And so is this making sense when I keep on saying this reflection thing? Because that's where using these social, like use your support team here to be able to think about, okay, what just happened? What was my trigger? And how do I process it? So so going back to this is, we know, I mean, is there anyone in this room has not dealt with a difficult or oppositional child here? Or just a challenging child? Everyone has, right? So the whole purpose of this training is to learn to become more intentional. How do I create my classroom culture? And that I'm very intentional about what I'm going to do and really thoughtful of what am I going to do. And I'm hoping we'll have enough time for you to at least have some more thoughts about that, of how do I want to create that? Because I know that working with schools, like there's little time to go, okay, what are the values I want to have for my classroom? What are the things I want to, like, what are some things I want to do for this classroom? And so this is going to give time to really take a step back to think about it. And so this is a really big concept. It's a simple concept. You guys probably know this, but then it's like we forget it. Is talking about the difference between react and respond. So there's typically, you know, whenever there's a stress going on, there's 3 things that should potentially happen. You know, you may feel, you think, then you act. Oftentimes, especially when we're dealing with difficult behaviors, we might feel, or we might just go into act, and we're just reacting to the moment. Versus, I want to do those 3 steps of I feel what's going on with me, something's feeling off, what's going on in my body, I need to calm myself down, what's triggering me, why am I not liking this child, I don't know. Okay, now I'm going to think, what am I going to do? How am I going to respond differently? Oh, I'm going to talk to the social worker because I'm really stressed right now. I need to kind of calm myself down, and I need to think of other ideas to manage this. So it's thinking, and then I act. So really going back to these problems, I guarantee after this training, you're going to be dealing with oppositional children. The purpose is now of this training, how do we take a step back to go forward? Okay? And time. So going back to, these are the early childhood protective factors that happen. So going back to why children, so we talked about certain factors that can be protective factors, like if you're likable, all this stuff, but also what are the skill set of individuals that can make one child survive and thrive and other children that's really struggling. So the 3 ones that we're really going to be getting into are attachment relationships, which is the mutual, strong, and long-lasting relationships between a child and a significant caregiver or adult. Initiative, the child's ability to use independent thought to meet his or her needs. and self-regulation and self-control, which is the child's ability to gain control of bodily functions, manage powerful emotions, and maintain focus and attention, and the child's ability to experience a range of feelings and express them using the words and actions that society deems important. So really looking at, can I control my emotions? How do I calm myself down? And am I able, do I have the emotional literacy to be able to express what's going on? So we're going to get really into each one of them. And then I'm just going into, and I'm going to go into, this is what the protective factors for school-age children are. The reason why I did start off with this, because you guys are working with school-age children, why am I not doing these protective factors? Because I guarantee they didn't master those protective factors of social emotional development from 0 to 5. So most of your children, at least the ones that I'm working with, a lot of them are coming in with such a deficit. So we're expecting them to take personal responsibility, but they don't have the ability yet of expressing their feelings or being able to manage their emotions. So it's like we're learning math and we're teaching them algebra, but they haven't learned their numbers yet. So that is often, and so I'm assuming this is happening because I'm dealing with children with trauma all the time. I'm assuming it's happening here as well as happening at any school I'm working with, where they just are coming in with a deficit. So so just going back to the protective factors there should be at, which most likely they're not, is being able to be self-aware of understanding his or her strengths and limitations and consistent desire for self-improvement. Going back to self-identity, if knowing what's good or bad, if you don't know how to attach and you're not able to kind of explore the world, it's hard to figure out, like, you know, what my strengths are or my limitations. If you've never explored the world, how do you know that? So I don't want to jump to that when we're still over here. Self-management, a child's success in controlling his or her emotions and behaviors to complete a task or succeed in a new or challenging situation. That's another one. So ones that we're going to work, these are all what we're going to work towards. So you can, when I'm going through all of this, you can assess your students of where they're at. So you'll have this list later, and you can assess, oh, are they at an early childhood level, or are they here? And this is what I want to be working at.
I have a comment.
Sure.
I think this happens. I had a special needs student, and then they had a gen ed kid. And they would ask me, why does the gen ed kid behave properly in school and this child doesn't? I think that's where I notice it, is that many gen ed kids can differentiate environments, whereas special needs kids have none of that differentiation. You know, this works at home, this should work at school. And that's very challenging.
Wait, so you're saying that a gen ed student can notice the difference between, so say that again? Between?
Like what works at home. I don't know, tantruming will work at home. But they know in kindergarten or first grade, tantruming isn't going to work.
Right.
Whereas a special needs kid can't.
Differentiate between the two.
Tantruming works at home, tantruming should work at school. And it's an intermittent reinforcement, so if I tantrum long enough and loud enough, at home I get it, it should work at school.
Right, right.
So I have that is a challenging situation to deal with, because they don't differentiate.
I actually even think some gen ed kids struggle with the same thing. But it still goes back to the same frustration of, like, as a teacher, what do I do with this? And what has the child learned at home? What are they coming in with? Right. This is how I've learned how to get what I want, which is fine. This is how I've learned how to manage my emotions. And so I still go back to, how do we start back to the class rules? Maybe class rules need to be changing. Like, how do we become more intentional? Because that is a problem. Like, where this worked for me, I'm gonna keep on trying this.
Right.
And what do you do? And so I'm just gonna briefly go over this, because I think, and in fact, I might just go over this, and is it okay, just because it's a more natural break, that we take the break after this, and then we'll come back a little earlier? Is that all right? Because it just feels like a more natural break. So So social awareness, a child's capacity to interact with others in a way that shows respect for their ideas and behaviors, recognizes his or her impact on them, and uses cooperation and tolerance in social skills. So how are we going to work on that if they don't know how to form positive relationships? So I'm going to just briefly, once again, go through this. Relationship skills, goal-directed behavior, decision-making, personal responsibility, and optimistic thinking. These are all factors that can make one child successful and one not. But let's first, and it's a little bit easier and more manageable to look at it. We're going to go through, after the break, we're going to get right into attachment and figure